Hi, this is John with WesleyGospel.com. I'm going to talk about spiritual gifts, as mentioned in 1 Corinthians 14. Spiritual gifts in that section are talking about spiritual experiences. Spiritual gifts, spiritual experiences, same thing. Gifts from the Holy Spirit. In other words, experiences from the Holy Spirit, but allegorically called gifts because they have a beneficial effect upon the person who experiences them. Now, the thing about 1 Corinthians 12, 13, and 14 is that the experiences are not described really that much. We're given hints and clues about just what those experiences are, but if we were to solely confine our understanding of spiritual gifts by those 3 chapters, we would come out with a very incomplete picture of what spiritual gifts are, and a whole bunch of question marks all over the place. Probably the most traditional teaching on spiritual gifts is Concerning Spiritual Gifts by Donald G., and then another book called The Gifts of the Spirit by Harold Horton. And I just bought that second book because I'm planning on catechizing my girls on it in the Sundays to come. But that's basically the 2 Assemblies of God books on spiritual gifts. And you kind of get a dictionary definition of terminology sort of approach with that, and you're still kind of left scratching your head after you read the chapters. You're thinking to yourself, what can I do to experience these spiritual gifts, and what can I expect to experience from these spiritual gifts? Oftentimes those books don't describe that. They oftentimes don't describe that at all. They don't describe that they come in the context of prayer. They don't describe what it really is like to experience spiritual gifts. That you have absolutely no idea whatsoever what it's like to subjectively and psychologically be the recipient of those spiritual gifts. All they'll do is give definitions of terminologies, give definitions of terms. Let's define our terms in terms of speculative definitions of what types of messages they may involve. Okay. And so it doesn't really lead to people experiencing profoundly supernatural spiritual gifts in their church. It doesn't. It leads to a sort of a Bible study understanding about spiritual gifts, and you're no better for it after the study than you were before it. You end up with these really vague understandings of, so that's what it would be like, theoretically speaking, if I were to experience a spiritual gift. That's what it would be like if I were to have one. My experience, whatever it is, this part is not explored. There's no understanding of what the nature of the experience is, would involve a message of that nature. So basically, the traditional, this has been my experience, this has been my general impression. The traditional Pentecostal books on spiritual gifts do not teach you how to experience them. They only teach you how to define different prophetic messages. That's it. And they also teach you that you can pray for the sick. Define prophetic messages into different categories and pray for people who are sick. That's all you got. That's all you got. How are you supposed to get the prophetic messages in the first place? How are you supposed to get enough faith to be able to lay hands on the sick and actually produce organic divine healings? This is usually never explained either in the Pentecostal teaching. So there's some huge gaps, in my opinion, some huge gaps in the teaching and in the understanding of miraculous spiritual gifts in the Assemblies of God books. Huge gaps. And I think the reason for that is that we're only looking at it from this detached 100 years after John Wesley, 150 years after John Wesley sort of approach without any Catholic theology helping us out, which was very supernatural. But that's not included here when we're looking at Assemblies of God. So there's no Catholic theology helping us to understand spiritual gifts. There's no lives of the Catholic saints contributing experiential insight. So it's like the whole thing is based off of a dictionary definition of different categories of prophetic messages. The word of knowledge, the word of wisdom. It's not spiritually beneficial. So you end up really no better off for studying those books than you did if you had no spiritual gifts at all. And then you just end up going to church during a service, raising your hands and closing your eyes and speaking in tongues. And this is what you call spiritual gifts. Right? It's not biblical. It's incomplete. I think that people are touching the powers of the age to come. They're touching the power of God, but they're not learning how to make use of that power nearly enough, because the teaching is incomplete. It lacks the Catholic mystical theology. It lacks Augustine Pauline's graces of interior prayer, which, if we have the maturity to admit that God moved in the Catholic Church up to a certain point, then we should also have the maturity, like A.W. Tozer did in Pursuit of God, to pick out the meat and spit out the bones in Catholic theology. And if you haven't noticed that in the Pursuit of God, A.W. Tozer borrows from Nicholas of Cusa's book, The Vision of God. Well, that was a Catholic theologian. Wesley does it a lot. Finney does it occasionally. John G. Lake did it with St. Patrick. There's a couple others that I could mention, I guess, but the point is that we're going to have incomplete understandings of spiritual gifts if we just get it from Assemblies of God. We will. We will have incomplete, because the whole Bible teaching on spiritual gifts requires Genesis to Revelation. It requires Genesis to Revelation. You can't just take 3 chapters out of the Bible, 1 Corinthians 12, 1 Corinthians 13, 1 Corinthians 14, and say to yourself, this is the totality biblical teaching on spiritual gifts. That's so ridiculous. No, we need to study all the way from the book of Genesis chapter 1 all the way up to Revelation chapter 20. And then we can understand spiritual gifts properly. And I'm going to tell you right now, I believe one of the major aspects of real miraculous spiritual gifts is the visionary aspect. And you do not see this being taught in those Assemblies of God books. It's about tongues. It's not about visions. It's about tongues. And it's about these vague definitions of prophetic messages pulled into different categories. The word of knowledge, the word of wisdom, whatever that's supposed to mean. I mean, if you really look at what Smith Wigglesworth wrote, he believed that the word of wisdom was a gift for Bible study. Do you really believe that? That the word of wisdom was a gift for Bible study and theology? That is the level. That is the level of understanding that most Pentecostals are at when it comes to spiritual gifts, because that's all their books teach. Oftentimes they have absolutely nothing to say about visions, much less anything to say about dream interpretation. And that is the primary way, Numbers 12, 6-8, that is the primary way God spoke to the prophets. That is the primary way God spoke to the prophets. God bless out there. This is John with WesleyGospel.com.